Directing and DPing a short-form branded content series
with no less than 10 separate deliverables
being shot over just 2.5 days.
We're all at different stages of our career and experience in this world of filmmaking for a living. And on top of that, different parts of the industry and different parts of the world operate differently.
When Bart and Sal from Trio Stories reached out asking me if I wanted to get involved in a decent budgeted brief they'd recently taken on, and to ask if I wanted to come to Poland to do it, I was excited. I liked Trio Stories' work, but it was clear that they were at a different stage in their career to mine.
However, what they lacked in experience, they made up for in enthusiasm. And enthusiasm is infectious.
I want to break down this job like I typically do, but also use this as a teaching opportunity.
I realise watching these videos is a wide range of people, from aspiring amateurs to large production working professionals and everything in between. And I know that Sal and Bart wouldn't mind it when I say that their production company, Trio Stories, is somewhere in the middle of all of that.
But no matter how good your work is, without time on set, there are some things you just won't know.
So in this video, I'm going to talk about some of the largely unspoken
rules of production.
How did you get the job?
We were invited to pitch for it by an agency called Midori, which we've done a number of jobs with before. Long story short, we won the pitch. The feedback that we got was this was a job specifically for the German market. And because we had done some work before for German audiences.
Also the style that they were after like this strong IP, which is our thing. Our ideas kind of resonated with them.
What's quite different about you guys is you're not just being approached as a production company, you're being approached as creatives as well. You're given the ideas, which I think we're seeing more and more of. The middlemen getting cut out, which is traditionally, the agencies are coming up with the creative, which I think is a budget thing. It kind of works because you've obviously got good ideas and you're then executing those ideas, but also it puts way more work on you and way more stress and pressure on you. Do you even think about the creative time when it comes to invoicing and billing, or are you just taking the hit on that? Because you might spend half a day, 2 days, 3 days, whatever, working on creative, and you're not technically getting paid for that.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
But the benefit is we do actually get to make stuff we want to make. So we would much rather spend that extra time and make stuff we've chosen to make and be given briefs that we don't really believe in.
We would all prefer to do that, but it's more what I don't like about it is, and obviously they're not looking at it this way, but companies are essentially taking advantage of you as because you might pitch your idea and then you don't get picked. And this is, the same thing with directing, but at least when you're treating on an idea, you're not you're bringing ideas to the idea. You're not starting from scratch, whereas you're literally been you're doing what agencies would get paid a lot of money to do.
Yeah, and I think that is 100% true. And that has been 90% of our work this year has been in that format.
A lot of the heavy lifting was done by Sal, Bart, and producer Kyan on this project during pre-production. Due to the smaller rates I was being paid, and with shooting in a foreign country, I was more than happy to share as much of everything as possible.
Which mostly meant not going on many calls or meetings with the client and agency.
I was going to be directing and DPing this job, and what became a limited budget really set our restrictions on this, both from a DPing perspective and from a scheduling perspective. As the director, I was asked to put together a mini treatment Trio and the agency would be presenting to the client on a pre-PPM. We were shooting so much, I really did keep it mini though. I wasn't really being compensated in a way that warranted much of my time here, but also even if I was, in the small window of time between the job being confirmed and me heading out to Poland to shoot it, I didn't have the time in my schedule.
I was already booked on another job out in Berlin.
I also put together this approximate schedule for the 2.5 days and these shot lists of everything we needed to capture within our 3 different elements. The must-haves at least. With the amount we had to capture, we weren't going to have many opportunities for more precise and stylized, nice-to-have shots. We really just needed to capture as much as possible, as quickly as possible.
As a DP in prep, I had to think about the space and the kit we were going to use.
I'd seen these photos of the studio and knew our limitations, which I guess are the same on every job. Time, people power, and budget, which largely dictates the first 2 limitations. So really budget is always the only limitation. Trio own a bunch of lower end gear. We were going to have to shoot on their camera kit, which thankfully contained zoom lenses.
Which I made part of my creative input, both because of the time-saving element and because of my probably somewhat overused use
of the cheesy crash zooms and energetic camera movement I wanted to pepper over everything. In Trio Stories kit, they also had a semi-decent sized Nanlite package and a not tripod, something which I'm used to contending with myself
When budgets are small and I have to use my own very tripod.
Also, the studio price included access to a bunch of their in-house kit. Again, mostly Nanlite stuff, some modifiers, a bunch of stands, and a large TV we were going to be able to utilize as a studio monitor.
Even with our limited budget, there were some things that we could afford to hire in from a gaffer locally though.
So having compiled lists of everything we had, I put it all into this spreadsheet with some requests for the gaffer we were going to be hiring the kit from. A few days before the shoot, on a Sunday night,
Not much more than 24 hours after having gotten home from my last job, I headed to the airport to go to Poland. I always try and fly from the airports closest to where I live, and always cut it fine arriving there because I hate spending time in airports. And that's probably why it was at this point on the Uber ride to Stansted late on a Sunday evening.
when I experienced my first car crash.
I then thought that was probably it for the evening and was going to get to spend another night in my own bed because there was about 30 minutes until check-in closed and I had no way of getting off the motorway. Until some legendary policeman said, "Get in," put his siren and lights on, and then drove like more of a madman than the Uber driver had been driving when we'd initially crashed.
Why didn't you film it?
Was the first thing Sal and Bart said when I told them. But like a lot of people, I live with the fear of the law and didn't want to get told off. So you'll just have to take my word for it and imagine that it looked a little something like this.
I made my flight and got into Gdansk a little after midnight. The next morning, we had a PPM with the client and agency. Then in the afternoon, I was hosted around the beautiful city of Gdansk by Bart and Sal, as well as heading to IKEA to pick up some props, as Sal was, as well as producing, playing the role of art department. We got my favourite fast food burger in the world en route home, Max Burger,
which I didn't know existed outside of Sweden. Then back at their apartment, Bart and Sal prepped and packed all the kit, whilst I finished off my shot lists.
Tuesday morning, after we loaded up their van, we headed to pick up some more art department bits before making the journey down to Warsaw. That night, after having first driven to the wrong address, we made it to an Airbnb close to the studio that was going to house 5 of the crew for the following few days.
It was only on our drive down, in casual conversation about our collective dislike for early starts, that I discovered the plan.
Despite me having sent over a schedule with a 10+1 day, was to start shooting from 6 a.m. and not wrap until 10 p.m.
Which is quite frankly insane, and leads me nicely onto our first 2 rules.
Communication and boundaries.
Well, the night before the shoot, I said something and you were like, well, obviously we're getting there at 6. It's like, what do you mean we're getting there at 6? No, we're not getting there at 6. You were planning on us doing like 6 in the morning till 10 at night for 2 days. And I was very much no. But straight away you said, but how are we going to get a shot in that time? And I was like, well, that's not like, we can do what we can do within our constraints, but we're not going to kill ourselves because the client hasn't got enough money to pay for 4 days rather than 2.5 days. I would have loved to have more time to have done all of that. But towards the end of both days, it's been such a long day. We've been doing so much more than just the one role. I'm physically exhausted. The work's only going to get worse and worse and worse. At the end of the first day with our actor, his energy was gone. He was verbally saying, I can't really do this much more. And he'd not done as long a day as we had. I would love it if in your guys' future work, you didn't do that to yourself.
I think that's a big learning for us straight away.
Like, I don't know. It was just like a switch. Like, as soon as you were just like, I mean, even before when we would ask something of you and you'd be like, oh yeah, well, I'll do it on Monday. Like, I'm not working over the weekend. We were like, ooh, that's wild. Like, we can have weekends off. Like, that's possible. And like, again, as soon as you said like, no, we're starting at 8, what was it? It was just like a switch and we were like, oh my God, we can do that. And then since then already we've had way better boundaries with like, we've claimed weekends. It was new for us, but we already love it.
Big takeaway, yeah. With creative work, tiredness really impacts it quick. Even if you're looking at it from the client side, you're doing the client a disservice to be working tired, right? So
it's not just creative work, it is also manual labor. We're doing physical things. You're so tired after 16 hours that you don't pack down something correctly, or like rather than ask for someone's help, you're just like, oh, just yang that. And like that's where like accidents happen. I say it all the time, like it's just a video. at the end of the day. Like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Life is so much more important no matter how much we enjoy our jobs.
I made some mistakes on this job, largely down to assumptions. Assuming certain things would be handled the same way as I'm used to in the UK was one of them.
It's so important to communicate, and I hold myself accountable for that as much as Trio for things like expected mental work hours and a last-minute director's treatment that hadn't been previously discussed, or to send over a shot list that I hadn't actually scheduled to do yet in my diary until the following week.
I set those boundaries when asked to do something over the weekend, on the weekend.
If I'm ever expected to do something like that, I want to know way in advance and be well financially compensated for it. Life outside of work is far more important than the work itself.
I was also asked out of nowhere if I could
Send over some storyboards. We were going to have over 130 individual shots to capture at a minimum for these 10 different deliverables. I explained that I wasn't being paid enough to draw so many boards, but there were plenty of great storyboard artists that I could recommend.
I believe Sal and Bart pushed back on this request because I never saw any boards.
But even in my lo-fi rubbish style of drawing, it would have taken days to draw that many boards.
The expectations were just too high, and even if I had been sat at home twiddling my thumbs with the time to do this, it's important to me that I set these boundaries, because although I recognise it's probably from a naivety that the clients are asking for so much on such a small budget, I don't want to be taken advantage of when the time simply isn't being paid for. This happens far too much in the creative world.
We were all wearing multiple hats on this job. Strictly speaking, we had a producer, director DP, gaffer, art director, art assistant, but not for the whole shoot, hair and makeup artist in the mornings only, a runner, 2 talent, 4 supporting cast, and 1 agency member.
But in actual fact, the producer was also
A fixer runner. I wasn't only directing and DPing, but sparking, art assisting, sound operating, and trying to first AD. The gaffer, Bart, was also producing, also camera assisting, also art assisting, also DITing. The art director, Sal, was also producing, sorting out crafty and makeup assisting. The runner, Casper, was doing whatever he was asked, as runners often are, but also capturing all this behind the scenes footage. Thanks, Casper. One of the lead talent was also our script supervisor, because this was all in German, and the agency was essentially a props master, trying to tame the wild mind of their own robots that were the product we were trying to shoot. They weren't designed to do specific repeated tasks at request. They're designed to just clean rooms.
When I did my schedule, and that's purely on me because I've not worked with robot vacuums before, I wasn't allowing time for the vacuum cleaner to not do what I needed it to do.
Map the set before it would work, yeah.
So after our initial scheduling hiccup, as a compromise, the day began an hour earlier than I'd have liked, arriving at the studio just before 7 a.m. As the morning progressed with setup, we hit our first challenge of the day. The custom LED sign that Trio had made up for the shoot that was working fine a few moments before flickered, cut out, and was not powering up again. Fortunately, Bart, the ever-persevering problem-solving professional, eventually worked out that it was 2 very thin wires touching and shorting the circuit.
Well done, Bart.
An hour and a quarter later than scheduled, not long after 10 a.m, we eventually turned over. On a job of this nature, with the wearing of so many hats by everyone involved, when you've got 3 producers all handling different tasks as well as roles outside of that producing, it's easy to see how things can get overlooked or simply just not delegated. There were 3 major hiccups that happened on this first day as a result of the team being stretched too thin and the schedule not being adhered to. Firstly,
the producer and art assistants turned up late, and I know that this is probably because they were picking up some last-minute thing for the shoot, but we had a runner for that.
This just isn't acceptable on any set, no matter the scale of the crew. It has severe knock-on effects. Early is the only time anyone on the crew should be turning up, and the main producer who knows what's happening should be the first person on site. When I say late, I'm only talking 15-20 minutes or so, but when you've got paid time on a location and what should be strict paid working hours of crew, you just can't afford to lose any minutes like this. Secondly, despite my protest to start earlier, we did compromise on a 7 a.m. start time. But then during setup, I was told that the lead talent wasn't actually going to be on site until 10, which was the time I'd originally scheduled them to start shooting when we had an 8 a.m. start. And their call time hadn't been brought forward. So this knocked our shooting schedule back immediately by a whole hour. Thirdly, Whether it was talent or production's fault, it doesn't matter, but our supporting lead wasn't anywhere to be seen and didn't arrive until nearly 11. I was able to shoot around this and cover off some close-ups, but this just shouldn't be happening. On a larger budgeted shoot, you would have a driver and or runner collecting talent well ahead of their call time to make sure they're ready to go on schedule, but we are all adults.
And I know I sound so uptight when I'm talking like this, but it's just the basic fundamentals to a successful shoot day. And it all relates to time.
Lots went really well on this shoot, and I'm really happy with what we achieved.
So good. Yeah, awesome. Great. Well done. So good. Really nice.
I don't want to come across too neggy, but another challenge we faced was our supporting talent, who also happened to be our script supervisor, being inside a matte blacked out helmet in a studio full of blinding lights. He could barely hear and couldn't see a thing. We got around this by rehearsing, shouting cues, and having someone ready to catch Alex whenever he was leaving set so he didn't walk straight into any light stands.
We ended up running a little over 13 hours on the first day.
Ending the day by rigging the lighting over the set Sal had pre-assembled, ready for our first setup the next day. Day 2 was another full-on but ultimately fun day, with set changes, a whole bunch of supporting cast, a lot of mess, the cutest on-set dog, who was also part of our supporting cast actually, forgot to mention that one earlier. Plenty more frustration and time wasting whilst we waited for the product to do what we needed it to do. And we managed to do it all within a reasonable 10 plus 1 hour day. The plus one, if you're not in the industry, is basically just a solid hour's break for lunch.
If we were doing like a 9-hour day or an 8-hour day, then sure, like just have 20 minutes to eat food and carry on working. But again, it's like having that moment to like rest, check your emails, respond to a couple of WhatsApps, just do something that's not physically full on.
The big job that we did before working with you is like we hired an external gaffer, and he was the first person that told us, do not order pizza on set.
Yeah.
We didn't know. We were just like, oh, should we order pizza? And he was like, don't do it. And we were like, why? Everyone loves pizza. And then he explained they're working every day on set. So if they had pizza every day, they'd die, you know? We kind of learned with that when you're bringing on someone who does work on set every day, you got to treat them like a human.
I think so many people that watch this will be like, privileged fucking wankers, we need to be treated like princesses. But when you actually do it, it's just not sustainable. The rest is important and the balance is important. And the remembering that it's just a job and life outside of this is more important than what we're doing is important.
I wanted to mention some changes I'd made because of our on-set dog. In the original script, she was meant to walk into frame, shedding some hair, and walk off. Then there was talk of her simply walking on and off camera when she was introduced.
But having worked with dogs before on a shoot, I changed this to just a simple insert shot of the dog being held into frame.
As I knew with our cramped schedule, it just wasn't worth the time risk it could take to get this right.
I'm going to sound like a broken record, but communication. And this is entirely on me too.
Rather than delegating Kyan, Sal or Bart to this task, I would have just addressed it to them as a collective. Something that happened a couple of times on this second day was, I would say something like, we're going to need X in 10 minutes. Can we make sure they're on set and ready to go? 10 minutes later, I turn around from filming whatever I've been filming and ask, where is X? They're not there. Someone then goes to get them from the holding area upstairs, eating into our schedule. Now, this is minor, I know, but communication affects time, which affects the schedule, which either has a financial impact,
as you run late and should be paying your crew overtime, or it has a quality impact because you then have to compromise and make the time up somewhere else.
Outside of the on-set dog and leftover prop cookies, one of my favourite parts of the day was coordinating this cheesy curtain reveal moment of the messy child. I love practical stuff like this coming together.
Action light, action curtain, action kid. That's really good. One more fun. See if we can get to the part any quicker. Action light, action curtain, action kid. Action light, action curtain, action kid. Okay. Scott's focus is just tied up, sorry everyone. And action light, action curtain, action kid. So good, Fabian, so good.
As well as watching Stephen from the agency, who was also our robot vacuum handler, use his body to try and tame the vacuums as he had to remap the ever-changing set each time we switched out a vacuum. All of our extras were great, with Bart translating, as they were all native Polish speakers. And again, we ended the day setting up for our first scene to come the next morning, which was basically rebuilding the presenter's studio set, but adding a touch of sexy for one of the videos. Obviously, rebuilding, or at least partially rebuilding, and having to relight a set is not the best use of time.
But we had originally planned to capture all the scenes of the presenter on the first day. But, you know, things go wrong. People turn up late. Robots don't robot. Time.
With the budget, we'd obviously been like, okay, we're going to shoot on all of your kit rather than the more cinema cameras and stuff. And on the one hand, I think that was a real helping hand for us because outside of money, with small crew, it's light and quicker to move. It's faster to like grab some batteries. But the biggest thing for me was not shooting with cinema lenses, shooting with DSLR lenses. Because obviously a big part of the creative approach to this was lots of crash zooms and zoom lenses. And when I've not done it digitally, when I've done it for real, it's janky as not just because I'm a bad camera operator, which I am not a good camera operator, but because I'm working with a DSLR lens rather than with a cinema lens, there's not enough room to control it smoothly. There was a few times I was like, this would be so much easier and so much better with a cinema lens. But then to get that level of zoom lens, you then need to have a cinema camera. And well, arguably not, you could have done it on a DSLR, but it would have been nuts. It's also like a lot of money per day for a big bit of glass. And would you have seen the benefits? Probably not. The client would never have seen the benefit. I look at it and I see where like, well, that could have been better. And that camera move would have been so much better if that, but like, does it actually matter at the end of the day? No.
Long before I'd arrived in Poland, Bart had asked me
If I would/could take on the edits. This was before I'd seen any detailed creative, but I asked Bart how long he thought it would take, and ever the people pleaser, as well as being terrible at saying no on any medium other than email or WhatsApp, I said yes, somewhat reluctantly.
not just because I don't love editing, but because I didn't know what the agency and clients were going to be like.
And I didn't want to find myself in a world of revisions in a language that I don't speak.
I tell you what was really tricky, actually, working in German. When you don't speak a single word of German. That's the first time I've ever done a shoot in a foreign language, and that was really hard.
But you see what I said to you about filming, right? Like, you actually, even though you don't understand, you can tell when something's a good tell.
The delivery, for sure.
I can't imagine the editing. The editing must have been.
That was tricky. I used a lot of Google Translate, and I had both the English transcript and the German open at the same time. And if I hadn't found that amazing German editor to help me do the selects for a day, then yeah, that was massively helpful. And he was cliche German, militantly organized when he sent the project back. I loved it. I was like color coded, like so good.
Yeah, that was a great decision from you as well, because that's not something I would have thought of.
It wasn't until we were on the job, I was like, how the am I going to edit this? Like, I have no idea.
The power of the internet really came through here.
Over on Instagram, I put a shout out for German-speaking Adobe Premiere using editors and had over 100 of you talented legends get in touch.
I'm very sorry for all of those that I didn't manage to get back to, but there's only so many hours in the day, and wow to what some of you are managing to charge as your day rates. I couldn't quite believe some of the rates that I was being sent, to be honest, and I thought that my rates were high.
Khan came in the sweet spot. He had the skills and he was, at the time of confirming, just within what I had budgeted for a day's work.
A huge shout out to Khan for prepping this for me. It was a huge help, and without it, I don't honestly know where I would have begun.
So, Scott, I hope you can understand me. As you can see here, all the yellow dots are the bits that work and that are perfectly fine. And the red ones or the pink ones, as you can see, are the ones that me personally I found the best. Here's video 4, which is structured alongside the script. So basically every sound bit here is from script. And here you have the voiceover script read as it's marked over here. Right?
It was also quite confusing when so many of the products looked identical to the untrained eye, during the shoot as well as in post.
One element that was super easy though was the music, provided by the sponsor of this video, Audio.
Even back on the shoot, before we got to post-production, I was able to use Audio on set when filming the presenter's dance cutaways for one of the videos, so he could be moving in time with the music when it came to editing later. The brief was something sexy and sensual, so I took a track that said all those things to me and used Audio's Link Match AI tool to find the perfect song, with minimal time spent having to find options.
I did waste a bit of time having to find the name of the track that I was thinking of though, but it looks like Audio have just solved that issue too.
With their brand new Hands AI feature. With Hands AI, you can simply describe your scene, from subtle emotional shifts to specific camera moves, tension building music for a dramatic moment or a soft melody for an intimate moment, and the AI will find the ideal track for you in seconds, allowing you to spend less time looking and listening for the right thing and more time editing. You can get unlimited access to Hans AI
and 70% off your first year of Audio Pro when you use my link at the top of the description, as well as the code Peters70 at checkout. Thank you so much to Audio for sponsoring this video.
There were a couple of things that weren't ideal to my personal likes and dislikes with the post, but they came down to budget constraints. I had some fun ideas for the titles and also to bring some more energy and lulls to one of the films in particular, but they both would have taken far more time than they had budget for.
So it really was just a case of getting through it all as quickly as possible and then making some of the minimal amends and changes from the client and agency.
I also really wanted to get this graded properly by someone with skills. But again, budget.
So I just used a lot I liked that I found for this particular camera, and then made some minor tweaks to the overall look and a few specific changes throughout. But overall, just set it and forget it.
Because there wasn't time for much more than that without running into unpaid time, which I didn't want to do.
My fees for this were a buyout situation for both the directing and DPing side.
£4,270 for my time in prep and during the shoot. But considering the budget total of $40,000, not pounds, my fee is a bit better than the director's 10%. The edits I did at a reduced edit rate of £500 per day for what ended up being a total of 6 days after amends were done for a total of £3,000. That's a combined total of £7,270 for my time on this job, plus expenses.
Given the same financial limitations again, what, if anything, would you do differently?
Good question.
Al wants to say not hire you.
No. I did think of that straight away. But then I was looking at the final product in my head and I am just really happy with it.
I look at the edits myself. There's loads of stuff that I would do differently or better, but I know it's down to time. And it's mostly cinematography stuff. Like the stuff on the white site, I would have lit this like this or like that. Some of those thoughts I had in the moment, but I was like, we don't have time. We just got to go.
If we did it again, genuinely, honestly, with this budget, I just think we would make it worse.
Intentionally make it worse.
Yeah, basically lower the production quality.
To actually what was being paid for,
They say never work with animals or children. And on this job, we did both of those things and added robot vacuums to the list.
But overall, I'm super happy with what we managed to achieve given our circumstances.
I am really happy with how it turned out.
I enjoyed it as well. The best thing about that whole job, actually, Paul was the best thing about that job.
Mate, you made this. This would have been a pile of without you.
He was so good.
Was it?
I don't know what you paid for him, but I know it wasn't enough.
That's a wrap.
Thanks so much to Trio Stories for having me on this one. If you made it this far,
Please give the video a like below. It really helps. For more tales from behind the lens, you should check out this playlist. And make sure to subscribe for more semi-helpful tips and interesting insider industry knowledge.